Hi, good evening, and welcome to our very first episode of Spark Tank by Plural. So, what's Spark Tank, you might ask? Well, a spark was what was needed to light a fire that changed the course of mankind. So, it was only apt that a show that ignites a fiery conversation was titled so. For us, Spark Tank is a way to bring in a variety of inspirational discussions to the fore, more so when the canvas is as dynamic as India's digital payments landscape. From startups to policymakers to co participants, the movers and shakers, we intend to invite them all and converse straight up and get you multiple facets and bites of information about the space as you peel an onion product by product. And that's where I would like to introduce you to our first ever guest at Spark, Gunjan Pradhan. One of the key members for driving the course of subscriptions business in the country, she leads payments at Netflix. So if you don't know her already, you definitely know of her work when you've been Netflixing. And she makes sure you well pay up for it. Prior to Netflix, she was with Citrus Pay and PayU and has been a payments enthusiast and a payments evangelist since 2014. An engineer and MBA by qualification, she started her professional journey in the oil and gas segment before experimenting briefly with healthcare strategy in Australia and happened to stumble upon payments upon her return to India. Without much further ado, let me welcome Gunjan. Do come on to the front stage, please. By the way, there will be Q&A at the end of the show. So if you hear interesting things and want to ask us anything, please add your questions to the chat and we will pick it right up. Welcome to the stage, Gunjan. How are you?
Thanks, Tanya. I'm well. Happy Women's Day.
Yes,
Thank you for
happy
having
Women's
me.
Day to you too. Yep. So, Gunjan, let me start right now. You always mentioned that you stumbled into digital payments. It wasn't by chance. I mean, it was by chance. But what drove you to a career in payments, and why did you choose payments way back when digital payments was just online banking?
Sure, right. I indeed did stumble into payments in 2013 and then eventually started in 2014. Upon my return to India post my MBA, I was diligently scouting the internet, applying to a bunch of companies, mostly ecom because ecom was booming in India. And to prepare for my interviews, particularly at payment companies, I searched the internet and had very little information about payment product. So armed with very little payment information and absolutely no prior relevant experience, I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to start my payments journey with Citrus, not knowing what I was getting myself into. But I have to say, I've fallen in love with payments since. And while I was at Citrus and at PayU, I was consistently wooing a lot of potential merchants, Netflix being one of them for a potential payments deal. And while the deal did not materialize, I decided to stay in touch with the Netflix folks, conversing around relevant payment ecosystem information long after they'd already selected their payment processor. So when news about Netflix launching in India made the headlines, I cold called my Netflix Connect and I said, "Hey, I'm really interested in being a part of the India payments team. It would be great if you could consider me." And before I knew it, my journey with Netflix had started.
Wow, and it's always serendipitous when that happens. I mean, you've tried to woo them as your client, and then you kind of moved to the dark side, didn't you?
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, I mean, and you've been with Citrus and then PayU, so you've literally worked from the guys who started it all in a way. And look where the journey has been so far in the last 6 years.
That's
but
true.
but obviously a lot of that also has got, I would say, exponentially grown thanks to all the various types of interventions that the government, that the regulators have driven, and a bunch of regulations have hit the market, especially which concerns payments. So just in this year we'll have the PAPG regulations, we'll have the 3ds 2.0 regulations, there's the tokenization regulation, and more so, which has directly possibly impacted your business, which is the SI and the subscriptions mandate. So, whilst I think it opened up a lot of new payment methods for you, you could now, let's say, onboard debit cards, you got UPI. It also created a huge amount of dependence on issuers to comply, and aggregators like us to actually offer you meaningful solutions. So, what and how has Netflix, Netflix done to offer meaningful solutions when it came to subscriptions to your customers?
That's an interesting conversation because you're right. We're at this confluence of innovation and regulation that is well intended to bolster innovation in the space. So, if you look at the heart of where or what regulations intend to do, they're really intending to consistently promote customer protections all along the way in the face of all of these regulations, right? While also boosting competition and supporting innovation that is required to drive economic growth. For the intent of the regulation to meaningfully serve its stakeholders, we need to understand that all stakeholders need to play their part. And you rightly said about the dependency that it creates, not just on issuers, but on the larger ecosystem stakeholders. And when all of these are checked and implemented thoughtfully, it creates competitive advantages for all stakeholders of the regulation. If you dive a little deeper into India, in any tech-heavy ecosystem like India payments, it's sometimes quite easy, almost tempting, I would say, to view readiness from a compliance deadline-focused lens. Unfortunately, that approach loses sight of one of the most crucial stakeholders, the reason behind why we are doing all of this, which is the consumer. And so I believe in order to serve the spirit of the regulation in its truest sense, it's essential for the ecosystem stakeholders' readiness to be determined not from a compliance deadline backward lens, but rather from a consumer forward lens. And this gets me to answering your question around what do we do at Netflix, right? At Netflix, we have been very deliberate about implementing regulatory mandates thoughtfully, with very close ecosystem collaboration and customer education to minimize customer disruption. Payment readiness is such a fascinating subject. Like when you talk about an interesting, intertwined, complex ecosystem, you need to understand that payments readiness requires a sequential capability building exercise across the ecosystem. What I mean by that is, let's take an example of any new product being launched in the market. It would be a scheme releasing technical documents on the basis of which the banks integrate. The banks then in turn releasing technical documents into which payment processors integrate, and subsequently payment processors then release technical documents into which the merchants integrate. And this then goes into this whole iterative process of testing and fixing and testing and fixing at each of the stakeholder level before launching it at scale. And therefore, I think it's important to be aware of these complexities to understand what is the role that a merchant plays in order to make sure that their customers face least disruption, fully knowing that the intent of the regulation is to eventually protect the consumer as well as bolster innovation. And therefore, I think demonstration of ecosystem readiness by everyone in the ecosystem is paramount for the success of any regulatory mandates. Anything done in a hodgepodge, compliance forward-looking mindset only is only going to cause us a lot of heartaches. And therefore, I think it is important to understand that any regulation that we do, as long as we're able to stay true to its to the objective that it wants to achieve, which is to bolster business and innovation while safeguarding customers, I think every merchant will be positioned to well service their customers.
No, very well said. And I think, especially with the way Netflix has handled the subscriptions rollout, also, I've seen a very systematic approach to it. And obviously, you allowed even your customers to take some leeway when it came to setting up of the mandate. And I know that, you actually even allowed some of them to experience it for a few months before started it out on a recurring basis. And that actually takes a lot of courage also as a merchant to do. So I definitely see that. But now, do you feel, is the ecosystem now at a stage where you feel that it is mature enough, it's got the issuer coverage, and are you now comfortable, with where the progress has been as far as subscriptions is concerned, or it's still a long way to go?
I think we've just begun the journey, to be honest, in terms of ecosystem readiness, in terms of people getting comfortable with the concept of subscription payments. People who know me well know that it's a common saying that I typically go to. India is the largest subscription economy by virtue of our population and our households. Um, while we did not have a robust payment solution to address the subscription business needs until very recently, to answer your question, as adoption of subscription payment grows and customer financial literacy grows, I think trust in the services and payments that provide subscription services will also start growing. It'll start making customers more comfortable about choosing convenience over control in making payments, which is one of the reasons why subscription hasn't taken off as well. I know it's a vicious cycle, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to customers' preference over control versus convenience, and therefore I see a boom in this in the subscription businesses industry. We're talking about entertainment, insurance, education, all compulsive spends, discretionary expenses, SaaS services, food delivery, right? All are moving towards subscription payment models in India too, and I definitely see that growing further.
Yeah, no, and super point, which actually brings me to my next question, because you're absolutely right. There is a whole boom of subscription driven businesses because there are platforms who want to drive repeat demand. And so there is a need also to digitize repeat collections. There's a whole world of B2B invoicing, which is repeat in that sense, but is still not digitized. And there are players, I think, in some extent, to an extent, maybe a charge B who's making that process of registering subscriptions simpler, easier, faster. But I mean, how do you think that companies who want to innovate in this space should look at this product? Obviously, Netflix is an entertainment platform, but like I said, there are many more platforms who need a subscriptions-based product and are going to see that demand going up. And then, like the B2B space, how do you think companies should look at a subscriptions-based platform when they're trying to build it out also for merchants?
I think at the end of the day, it's really about understanding what your merchant needs are, basis what the merchant is trying to cater to their customers. There are various models available globally, depending upon what level of control does a merchant want to have in the subscription journey of a customer. There are various metrics that you use in order to determine the lifetime value of a customer. But I think at the end of the day, the role of payments is to have a north star in terms of saying we shouldn't be the reason behind why a customer doesn't take up a subscription service, and we shouldn't be the reason behind why a customer leaves the service. So I
Sure.
feel like at the end of the day, as long as you're able to achieve that mission and that statement, whether you go via service providers, and there are many in the market today who are able to provide you a holistic subscription platform to better manage your subscriptions, or as a merchant like Netflix who prefer to manage the customer life cycle on their own terms. I think at the end of the day, if you're going to stay true to what you want to achieve in terms of payments not being the hindrance to customers experiencing the product or service, I think you would have achieved what you want to. And therefore, it requires a sit down for service providers who are in this space, sit down with the merchants to really understand what is it that they want to service them for, right? There are a lot of service providers who would say, do your business, leave your payments to us. And I think that's a great tagline. And I think it's really about identifying what your merchant needs are and where do they think their services would be most valuable to them.
No, fair point. And actually, I want to pivot that question, my next question, to catering to the needs of varied list of customers, right? So obviously, there is a savvy bunch of customers who understand card SI, or maybe are on their path to understanding card based SI. UPI is obviously taking play and will gain prominence. But then there was that whole world of the old mode of collections, which was NACH. And for those who don't know, that means the National Automated Clearing House based of settlements that helped you register online physical mandates for recurring payments. And for many, many years, that has been the mode of recurring payments. And businesses can even today work with aggregators like us or banks to allow your customers to opt for such mandate setup. So where does that leave payments like these, which are age old in that sense, but obviously, and customers are used to it because guess what, they've been doing it for so many years. Where does that leave these type of collection modes?
Um, it's an interesting question. As subscription payments become more mainstream on offerings like cards, UPI, wallets, other alternate payment methods, Nash will really need to innovate to better appeal to their customers. Nash was a great option for subscription payments when debit card recurring was not permitted, or for that matter, when UPI did not have payment offerings, because at the end of the day, all of them cater to the same underlying bank account. However, as you look at cards, UPI wallets being allowed on recurring payments, and the consumer flow or the consumer journey that has been designed therein, we will require Nash to solve for some really critical consumer pain points or payment pain points in order to continue to have competitive advantage. So I think they're still relevant, but unless they innovate quickly and solve for those customer payment pain points, they will. There is a risk that they may disappear into oblivion, and I think that's something that they need to be wary of.
No, agree. Could not agree more. But I do see a lot of innovation even on that front. I was just reading about the whole, authentication using biometric for NACH mandates now. So obviously, they're also it's going through its own journey of digital transformation. But yeah, you're right. It needs a lot more on that space, and continuous innovation needs to happen. So really, what's the unserved need when it comes to recurring payments in your view? And if you look at the India market versus US, and obviously Netflix serves a very large US customer base, and it is used to working in a very different way in the US versus India, where I'm sure you have had to tweak your product just like many other global companies have had to tweak their payment products here. So, what's the unserved need in recurring payments that comes to your mind today when it comes to India? And how different is India from a US based, more mature subscriptions market?
Um, that's again an interesting question. When you talk about subscription payments in developed economies, it's like teaching water to fish, right? They don't know what it means to be outside of that ecosystem. And therefore, I think when they view India, they'd be, oh, it looks, there's a lot of friction, there are a lot of 2FA requirements. But really, if you're following the international news closely, there are markets who are moving towards a 2FA based systems. Europe by EU by version or by virtue of them adopting or implementing the PSD2 guidelines are required to do 2FA on transactions basis risk assessment of the transactions. And I feel like that is obviously the way in which this is going to eventually move towards. And I think there is a lot of ease of doing payments in developing countries when it comes to recurring payments, but because of the way in which they were structured and there not being imminent losses associated with not understanding the value that recurring payments provide. Or people taking advantage of the fact that people don't understand the value that recurring payments provide. But for India, I feel like some of the unserved needs or some of the things that are top of mind are, we have a 5,000 rupee cap on recurring payments. And I think relaxing that cap could bolster further growth in recurring payments. There are use cases like SaaS services, insurance fees that are ripe for reaping the benefits of expanded cap on recurring payments. The other thing that comes to mind is expanding recurring payments facility to lines of businesses and use cases that could genuinely benefit from this recurring mandate. And it may require tweaking or flexibility around pre-debit notification to accommodate these legit use cases. I feel like as long as we're able to be open to the idea that customer convenience does not come at the cost of payment security, and that both of them can go hand in hand, and there is a huge environment or there's a huge ecosystem out there that will benefit from fully appreciating the complexities of this entire ecosystem, but also understanding that there is place for both to coexist, then I think there are a lot of other opportunities that could come up. And these are just top of mind for me. But in terms of what else we could do, I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, as the guideline, as more and more merchants, as more and more use cases come in, I'm sure there'll be a lot more revisiting of some of these limits, so to speak. I mean, look at the way even UPI limits have increased over a period of time, or IMPS has happened. So I'm hoping, and for the benefit of the entire ecosystem, that is indeed relooked at, as and when the time comes. But great, I can see a bunch of questions which have already been put out. But before we move to that, I am actually going to pivot to a segment that we would like to call as fab or fad. So here, what I'm going to do is mention a keyword. that you often hear in today's times. And I'm going to ask you, Gunjan, to talk with me about it, and for the audience to type what they believe this keyword to be. The wittiest, funnest, simplest responses will just lead to more debate. Okay, so with that, Gunjan, the buzzword is BNPL. Okay, so with that, what's your view? What do you think about it?
um, I think it's a very popular payment method that has really picked up a lot of buzz. BNPL has really trailblazed its way into our lives by virtue of it being easy to access, and it provides smooth customer checkout experiences. And I think especially for a country like India, which only has 69 million credit cards versus the upwards of 900 million debit cards, I think BNPL helps satiate that sweet spot of needing to make credit access easy for interested folks, especially those who were not eligible earlier. Um, but I think with this buzz and all of this fandom, also comes certain challenges that are beginning to rear its head. And it appears that there are corners that were cut globally, not just in India, in making BNPL the global success that it is. There are investigations and articles suggesting that BNPL were engaged in somewhat not so great practices in garnering more customers. And some of them range from lending without licenses to giving loans without KYCs to minors as well. And I think the Ken and the Morning Context also had done some stories about this last week. And I think with an increase in these sort of complaints, the regulator is now really looking to is standing up and taking notice. And there are talks about the regulator wanting to create a supervisory framework for India's BNPL players. If you were to look at how other countries who are big on BNPL have been addressing this, and I used to take care of Australia as well in my capacity at Netflix. So Australia comes first to mind, and Australia has a BNPL code, which is like a self-regulatory industry code. Um, However, I think anytime any industry grows bigger than what they were intended to, there's going to be ongoing debates about what is the future of regulation for a payment method like this. And there are two sides to an ongoing debate about this around some saying self-regulation is really more appropriate for mature industries having abundance of well-established players. But on the other side, there are concerns that if you're going to introduce additional regulation on a fledgling sector, then you may stifle innovation in that sector. So I think there is merit in paying heed to both sides of the debate, but also really being conscious about what is it that you're trying to solve for. In Australia, particularly, there seems to be some changes happening in the BNPL space where the regulator is looking at some of the charges that the BNPL players restrict merchants from passing on the surcharge to their customers and stuff like that. But I think there are also very interesting data points globally which shine light on BNPL consumer behaviors. For example, in Australia, and I think it's not very different in India too, they say that data says that customers who use BNPL, interestingly, were more likely to overdraw on their transaction limit, fall behind on their debt repayments, and be in financial hardship. And so I think in contrast to customers who don't take BNPL, they're most likely to struggle with debt or be in financial hardship. And therefore, delinquency has always been one of the biggest open questions around the sustainability of BNPL as a product. I think one of the most important things, and some of the articles are also touching upon this in the recent past, there are concerns around BNPL related to customer detriment, where it looks like it's promoted to customers as a payment option rather than a loan. So there isn't really enough information on this being a loan. There is lack of understanding of BNPL features amongst customers, which leads to a scenario of customers being very heavily leveraged. There are either no checks on credit worthiness. So people who or credit companies who want to provide credit to the individual have actually no history of that individual's credit file. And or on the flip side, there are credit checks that are happening in excess and thereby impacting credit scores. So I feel like it calls for a good debate. And the way I look at it is, I think as next steps, and it's imminent, I think the Indian regulator would hold public consultations on what the regulatory framework for BNPL should be. As a data point, UK Treasury has just closed one very recently. And I think the other thing is also being more responsible around customer literacy regarding BNPL. I think that should and could be prioritized.
No, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I'm just looking at some of these comments, right? I mean, Lower Niklo is so true. If you call BNPL as a buy now, pay later product, which is just to pay it conveniently, pay it faster, but you miss the point underneath it all that it is actually a loan. So obviously, if there are customers who are signing up for it without knowing that it's a loan, I think that is a problem that, at least in our market, we have to address. And I really like another comment that Debarshi has made is that if you don't have access to CC, it's useful, credit cards, yeah, of course. However, small amounts can trick young people into spending more than they should, and that creates a debt habit eventually, and which frankly is the source of debt everywhere else in the developed world. So yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more with you on that front. But yeah, I mean, Gunjan, coming back to that part, somebody's also written BNPL is a credit trap. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think there is enough evidence, at least fledgling evidence, to say that because of the lack of understanding what BNPL is, it leads to customers really getting themselves heavily leveraged. And I think that also explains the data that some of the banks in Australia had shared around these people falling behind on their payments, overdrawing on their transaction limit. I was even hearing about some customers prioritizing BNPL loans over their mortgage because they're so heavily leveraged. And these are all data points that should get us concerned. And therefore, I think
That
I
doesn't
go
even
back to my
fit into
previous
the
point.
hierarchy of
No,
loans.
right?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's why it's important
Yeah.
to always balance what you want to provide as innovation versus making sure that it's customer convenience as well as safety of customers.
Yeah, but I do agree. I mean, as long as the customers are aware of what they are doing and what they are purchasing at point of sale and how they're purchasing it at point of sale, I think that in itself is, I mean, first step towards making sure that BNPL is truly democratized. Obviously, the other part on BNPL, Gunjan, is that it's very, very, it's a new term now, but EMI has always been there in the market for so many years, especially in India. And when it comes to the consumer durable space, it's pretty much been the most preferred way for a lot of Indians to buy this online and offline. There are players like Bajaj who've actually created fintech models on the backs of
Mm-hmm.
something like this through paper financing. But then came the new wave of these small ticket, high volume, transactions which were being done on the BNPL module. Do you actually believe that was that an innovation that was needed, or what do you think about it?
I think BNPL at the heart of it definitely tries to solve for us being a very risk averse market financially. Given that, again, data speaks for itself, we only have 69 million credit card users or credit cards issued in the country. What percentage of them are active users is a big question mark, right? And I think they did try to solve for that really interesting white space where people want to take a credit product but are unable to avail it because they don't have credit worthiness yet. But I think they went overboard with it. There is enough and more in the press around how some of the BNPL service providers are operating without a license, without a BNPL license. They're
Yeah.
flouting rules. The fact that these frequent checks on credit worthiness of a customer is the algorithm on credit worthiness checks this or identifies these as being credit hungry and therefore lowers your credit scores, which was so fascinating. And for
Yeah.
no fault of the customer, without having defaulted on any of their loan payments, still suffer the brunt of somebody else's callousness, so to say. So I think the heart was in the right place, but I think we just went overboard with wanting to sell this new business model, get more investments coming in. and therefore show more users on the platform, which has led to quite a lot of misuse.
Agree. Couldn't agree with you more. I think a lot more that needs to get done to make sure this is marketed and promoted accurately to the various cohorts of people who we want to target as well and increase the share of credit across the economy. So couldn't agree more. So with that, actually, that's an awesome debate, by the way. Thank you, Gunjan. Super thoughts. I'll now move on to the last section, which is on the Q&A, and I can see a bunch of questions for you. I'm going to start off with the highest upvoted question, which says, "Does Netflix lose out on subscribers who don't have credit cards?"
Does Netflix lose out on subscribers who don't have credit cards? Not really, right? We are a country who has upwards of 900 million debit cards. We are a country who has upwards of 200 million UPI unique UPI users, and we provide debit, we provide UPI on our service. So the fact that we have cards and UPI which encompass the target audience that we're after, we're more than sufficiently covered to make sure that customers who want to experience Netflix can pay with their preferred payment instrument.
Fair. So I think the answer is no. You don't lose any subscribers. Cool. Okay, so the next question is from Gautam Marva. How has Netflix's experience been with UPI Autopay? It's obviously a new payment mode. Has it simplified the subscriptions experience, or do you feel there's a lot more to be desired?
I think it is what we need to caveat this answer with, and even this question with, and I think I know where this question is coming from, is the fact that you're comparing a very new infrastructure with a card infrastructure which has been available for decades together. There's been a bunch of innovation that has happened globally on cards. There's been contribution from every country to make sure that card ecosystem is as robust as it is today. UPI in India has been, it's a pioneer. There's a lot that needs to be done. And I feel from that perspective, I don't even think it is a fair comparison to say, has the experience not been up to the mark? To be honest, I went into UPI fully knowing what we are getting ourselves into. It has been hugely rewarding in terms of enabling UPI because it's helped unblock a lot of customers who were otherwise hesitant to provide their card instruments online. And again, it goes back to some of the points I made around customer trust and preference. So it's been said in a nutshell, UPI has been very rewarding. I think there's a lot of opportunities for improvement. But hell, where isn't an opportunity for improvement? Even cards have an opportunity for improvement. So yeah, it's been a great experience so far.
Great, good to hear. Good to hear. Ankur Gupta has one more question. Does Netflix plan to build an in-house stored value system like a wallet so that challenges regarding subscriptions and subsequent customer drops can be prevented? I would love to ask you this as well, actually. Good one, Ankur. Is there any plan to increase the transaction flow?
Never say never. And I think this would have been a great question had we been having this conversation in 2018, because there was no line of sight on recurring payments. There was no line of sight on cards or wallets or UPI. I think we've come a very long way since 2019, where the regulator was able to understand the pain points and permit recurring transactions on cards and wallets and UPI. So from that point of view, it really is a function of what use case or what problem statement is it going to solve for us. For now, while with the coverage that we have on UPI and cards, I think we are sufficiently covered. But again, never say never, and there may be an opportunity where we say, all right, we're going to do this. So we don't shut down any of these conversations. There are always great ideas that we keep debating on and going back to.
Agree, yeah, and yeah, you are right. If there was no line of sight on recurring payments, I guess wallets would have been the next best option. Yep. Okay, let's move on to Arnab's question. Apart from the present SVOD model, would Netflix consider partnering with any other platform offering different revenue models like pay-per-view or hybrid models?
I'm not the right person to answer this question. Yeah, so no comments on this one.
No problem. Okay. What should payment industry do to reduce frauds for both card members and merchants?
At the heart of it is customer education. Majority of the frauds that happen in the country um, is a function of social engineering frauds.
Yeah.
With the foresight that our regulators had, we were able to circumvent a lot of fraudulent transactions on cards that could get stolen. Because you have a second factor authentication, you're required to present all of the data to accurately affirm to the bank that you are indeed the cardholder, or you at least know you're doing this with the permission of the cardholder. I feel customer education is definitely lacking. Every other day you hear about scamsters, um, you know, scamming people of their hard-earned money, and I think it all boils down to being driving financial literacy in the country, and that I think is the most important to make sure that we're there to reduce frauds.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, to a very large extent, I've seen the work that the UPI, digital payments awareness campaign has brought in, where people understand the difference between a collect versus a push call, and are not necessarily paying as opposed to collecting money. So, and that's been actually a huge change, which has been driven thanks to a lot of effort in educating customers about how to collect money using UPI and how to pay using UPI.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you there. Obviously, with 2.0, I'm guessing the protocols change and we can do a lot more around risk-based authentication on the cards front as well. But yeah, that's for whenever we have a mandate which approves for it. Let's move on. Uh, I think. Do you want to take this, Gunjan? Did Netflix face issues due to the RBI guidelines on accepting recurring payments?
Um, when the recurring payment guidelines were introduced in August of 2019, we started working with our payment service provider to make sure that we were well equipped to handle customers and customer flows for when it was ready. Very few people know this, but we were ready with recurring payment solution much before the September 30th deadline. And so from that point of view, I think we were very well prepared to know what was hitting us. It goes back to the question Tanya posed around ecosystem readiness. And at the end of the day, as long as all of us are doing our bit to playing the role that we're supposed to play in the ecosystem, I think we'll be good in making sure that our customers face minimum disruption.
Yeah, no, I can pray witness to that as well as a customer of yours on the platform. So yeah, I think teething issues aside, it has seen some sort of easing out now after
It
6 months.
has, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So Gunjan, how is the payment processing at Netflix? Is it one processor or do you have a specific one for India?
It's a hybrid, and given that we have global platforms, we try and leverage what's the most meaningful for any market that we are in. So we work with two processors in the country. Both of them are local. Yeah, and it's really about identifying what is the need of the hour and what is the need of that market. And we don't have a one size fits all. So there may be other countries that leverage global rails, but countries like India would then focus on a hybrid sort of a model where we have a gateway model, a payment aggregator model. So it's not a simple answer, but suffice to say that we do have a hybrid way of making sure that our payments are processed in the way that is most meaningful for that market.
Got it. Makes sense. And we're down to our last question. I think this is a generic one, but a great question from Ritu. What are the biggest challenges you face as leaders, people, processes, etc.?
I haven't heard the word process in over 4 years. It's interesting because at Netflix we don't believe in processes. Um, it's a very value-driven organization where the investment is people. And I feel, therefore, as leaders as well, people are your biggest challenge in terms of what is it the challenge that you face, as they are your biggest assets. So it really depends on um, how you cultivate that to make sure that you're able to then either reap the benefits of the asset that you have, or face the challenges of you not being able to handle that asset well. Yeah, so processes, I think processes just tie you down. And I haven't seen processes in action in the last 4 years, and it's recency bias, but I definitely feel if you're investing in people and taking them as an asset, then they don't come across as challenges to you. Then for this particular question, maybe it is processes.
Yeah, for sure. For a product, maybe, and to take the product to live, go live, maybe. But yes, as a leader, I would tend to agree. I mean, it is the people who drive your business. It's the people who buy your products. It's the people who sell your products. So obviously, it is people who are absolutely critical to the growth of your business. We've ourselves seen it as we've seen Plural grow from the one member team that was me to now close to 100-member team in the last 1 year, and that's only thanks to the people who have had the faith and the people who have had the ability to drive it to where it is today. So completely agree. It's also challenging to manage a variety of people coming
Yeah.
together, but I think what helps is a common cause, and I think what has helped us is the passion to make a difference within the digital payment space. And I think you are in that similar proponent space as well. So yeah, good question, Ritu. Thank you for that. I think with this, we have sort of wrapped up our Q&A as well, and it also brings us to the end of the podcast. So first of all, thank you so much, Gunjan. Thank you for all the bites of information that you've given us. It's going to help a lot of, I guess, budding entrepreneurs, budding payment enthusiasts, experts as well, to drive some perspective into how subscriptions is going to, change the course of collecting payments in the country. I had a fantastic time chatting, and I hope everybody else had a great one listening in as well. We will be sharing this across all our platforms, and we'll come back to you as content that you can consume over the next couple of weeks. So until then, keep that spark on. Thank you very much, Gunjan, once again, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Tanya. It was fun.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.